Good evening, everybody. I'm your host, PREET GILL, and welcome to Back to Basics, Common Sense Law with PREET GILL. I'm so excited that you're here today on our first segment. But before we get started, I really wanted to take the opportunity to introduce myself and also go over the goals and objectives and to explain what this show is really about. So my full name is Navpreet Gill, and I'm an attorney and a partner at Shariak, Bowman, Anderson, Gill, and Kadachnikov, LLP. I specialize in immigration and estate planning. Since all of you know what immigration is, what is estate planning? Estate planning is planning for a will, planning for your children, planning for what happens with your assets, and then whatever happens once somebody passes away. So as you can see, no one lawyer can be able to specialize in every single field. And just the way we're not expected to specialize in one particular field, how can the person, you, my viewers, who may not have gone to law school and are pursuing other professions, understand some of the legal issues that surround them every day? So and I just wanted to give a disclaimer, New York, my law firm and I am a New York-based attorneys. Although most of the discussions that we will have will be on federal law, which covers all of the United States and the United States territories, there will be times when we're talking about New York-specific cases or laws. So this show is not meant to give you legal advice. It is not meant to teach you how to become attorneys all of a sudden, but instead, it's meant for you to be able to see small issues on your day-to-day lives, such as your credit cards, your family law issues, real estate transactions, mortgages, employment law, discrimination. Every little, if you look around you, you're always connected to the law somehow. So the goal of this show is to be able to break down and get back to the basics of the small little elements that affect you so that you can one day say, you know what, something's wrong here. And you can be able to pick out when you're a victim or when you sense something is not right, or just knowing your basic rights can actually save you hundreds of thousands of dollars and a lot of headache in the future. So this is what we're going to do today. In my show, on each segment, I'm going to bring in different attorneys or other professionals that specialize in that particular area of law that we're going to be discussing. Because even as an attorney, I could be confused about a lot of the law because there's no way. So if you're confused, stay with me. Let's go through all the shows and we're going to talk about back to basics. Today, what we're going to talk about is something, if you look into your into your wallet, do you see credit cards? Do you have debt? Do you have student loans? Do you own a house with a mortgage? If any of these things are applicable to you, then you must be wondering about what your rights are as a person who has debt. So, we're going to get started today on consumer debt. The United States and the federal government has come with the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. That's a long word, Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. There's a smaller way to say it, it's called Fdcpa. So when you hear me say the word Fdcpa throughout the show, it means that I'm actually talking about the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. The United States enacted this act in order to protect consumers. Now, who are the consumers? Well, it's actually easier to define what is not a consumer, okay? What is not a consumer? Generally, it's someone in a business, someone that gets debt through a business. So if you own a business and you get a loan for your business, that's not protected in this Fdcpa Act that we're going to be talking about today. But I can give you some examples. If you have credit cards, if you have student loans, if anything that you and I personally are in debt for, that's called that's a consumer that's protected under Fdcpa. Now, what does it protect you from? It protects you from debt collectors. What is a debt collector? And this is something that you need to know. It is not, so for example, if I have a credit card with Chase Bank, I borrowed money from them, right? So they are the debtor, but it's not, the Fdcpa does not actually include Chase. A debt collector under FDCPA is a person, a third party that is hired to come after you to collect the debt. So going back to my example with that Chase credit card, if let's say I owe money and I stop making my monthly payments, and Chase, after calling me, they call me, they send me letters, they realize she's not going to pay, we're tired, we don't have the resources, usually they will then hire a third party, a company that specializes in collecting the debt. So if many of you may have received letters from a company that has a completely different name from the company that you borrowed money from. And so that is what a debt collector is. So I wanted to define these two terms for you to understand under FDCPA who is the debt collector and who is the consumer. Okay, so today we're actually going to have a special surprise for you guys. That's going to be somebody that practices in the FDCPA, and he's going to be able to tell you what your rights are as a consumer and what you can do to protect yourself against a debt collector. So stay tuned with me. When we get back, we're going to introduce him. Good evening and welcome back to Basics, Common Sense Law with PREET GILL. Before we ended the show earlier, I did promise you that I have a special surprise for you. We're going to have a guest today that is experienced in FDCPA. Now, as we said, FDCPA stands for the Fair Debt Practices Act. But before we do that, I just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions, you actually have an opportunity to dial in and call us live if you have any questions. Now, please keep your questions related to the specific topic that we're talking about. You'll see the number on the screen, and so that this way we can maximize our show. So today with me we have Alexander Kodachnikov, who is a partner at my firm at Sheriak Bowman Anderson Gill and Kodachnikov LLP. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we were talking about consumer debt and we were talking about the protections. I did tell them a little bit about FDCPA. So tell me now, what exactly, now we know who the consumers are and we know who the debt collectors are. How does FDCPA protect me and my viewers?
So what's FDCPA was enacted to do was it was meant to stop harassment by debt collectors. So what is meant by harassment? If a debt collector calls you before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m., or if the phone calls are just coming in one after the other, those are all things that the law was meant to stop. The other thing that the law was meant to stop was from, for example, mischaracterizing the amount of the debt or what the debt collector or the creditor, like what steps they could take to enforce the debt. For example, they couldn't represent themselves to be a member of the law enforcement, a member of the government. They weren't meant to lie to you.
Okay, so you just said something interesting. You basically said that the debt collectors there's a certain time when they can call you?
So generally it's after 8 a.m. or before 9 p.m.
So they can call you between 8 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night. So if I get a call from a debt collector at 7:30 in the morning, is that a violation of the FDCPA?
It could be an automatic violation, yes.
What do you mean by an automatic violation?
So an automatic violation means that every time this law is violated, it's a fine that you as a consumer are entitled to, a fine of $1,000.
So every time the debt collection company makes some sort of a violation of the FDCPA, it's an automatic $1,000 fine?
Yes, it could be.
Okay, it could be. So if they called me at 7:30, that's a violation. Now you said that there was also some other things where they can't lie or they can't misrepresent how much debt you owe. Can you give us an example of what you mean?
Well, for example, let's say you missed a few payments on your credit card. Let's say the total amount of the debt is $1,000. But now you get a letter from somebody that says that the total amount you owe is all of a sudden $3,000. That's something that would be considered a misrepresentation.
Why would it be a misrepresentation? What if there's interests and penalties?
All of the interests and penalties, they are supposed to be spelled out. And even if they are spelled out, they shouldn't be, they should tell the truth.
Okay, so what if I am in that situation and I miss a payment and I get this, I owed $1,500, but all of a sudden they send me a bill for $3,000 and I don't know what it's for. What can I do under the FDCPA to protect myself?
So there's a couple of things you can do. Let's say you are overwhelmed with letters, with phone calls, and you just want it to stop.
Okay.
The best way to stop it all is to put it all in writing, to write a letter, and we will have a form of the letter available on our website for our viewers to be able to download.
Okay, and can you give us a little bit of example of what the letter should say?
The letter should say that, please stop calling me, please stop writing me letters.
Mm-hmm. And is there a method that you would actually recommend the viewers as to how you can write this letter so that there's proof that you actually mailed it to them?
So the best way to mail this letter or to deliver this letter to the debt collector is by some sort of a method that has tracking. So either certified mail, return receipt requested, FedEx, anything that you could make sure that it got there.
Okay, and what does the letter serve? Like what is the purpose? So back to my example, if they're calling me at 7:30 and they're making all these violations or they're just harassing me and I just don't want them to call me anymore and I write this letter, what is the significance of writing this letter?
It puts the debt collectors on notice.
Okay.
It puts them on notice that that you want them to stop. You want them to stop doing whatever collections efforts that they're taking.
Okay.
And if they keep going with their collections effort, you can sue them. You can sue them for actual damages and what's called statutory damages, which is $1,000.
But lawsuits are very expensive. Attorneys are very expensive. And if you're only going to get, let's say, $1,000, why would somebody even waste their time and energy into filing a lawsuit?
Well, that's the beauty of this law, is that it's what's called a fee shifting law. And what that means is that if it's indeed proven that the law was violated, it's the defendant, in this case the debt collector, who would actually have to pay the attorney's fees of the debtor.
So in situations where you represent clients on an FDCPA lawsuit, what exactly, so you don't charge them?
Yes, what that means is that we wouldn't take a penny unless we win the case.
Okay. Now, is there also another benefit besides receiving the $1,000 or whatever the money will be for making the violation? Can the consumers get any other benefit by suing the debt collectors when they make these mistakes?
Yes, a lot of times we are able to either wipe away the underlying debt or reduce it significantly.
Okay, so I just wanted to recap for our audiences, what Mr. Kodashnikov here is saying is these debt collectors, there are laws put in place to keep them in check. And if they have a violation, you actually have the right to actually sue them. And one of the benefits that you may get, now it's not a guarantee, but part of the negotiations can be that not only did they make this mistake, but you can also try to get your debt wiped clean because they made this mistake. Is that basically?
That's correct.
Okay, so I mean, and now I have a question for you. Why do, I feel like sometimes, just from my experience, that debt collectors will knowingly violate these terms. Why do they do this?
Well, a lot of times it's because they think they can get away with it, essentially.
What do you mean?
Because most people don't know that laws like that exist. So, and the debt collectors, that industry, that they know that most people won't do anything about it. So they take that risk.
So you're basically saying that these debt collectors willingly can do this to take advantage because it's actually more beneficial for them to be able to do these violations, pay whichever people that do sue them, but because they can get away with it and nobody really sues them as much, they go ahead and they do these bad acts.
Exactly.
But there's no criminal penalties in this?
No, there are no criminal penalties, and even if there were, it's not something that we as private attorneys would be able to enforce.
Okay, I see. But so basically, there's really no criminal consequences if they make a violation. They realize that they're just going to have to pay some money.
Well, yeah, I mean, unless the violation is really egregious, let's say somebody is threatening your life unless you pay a debt, then that would be something that's a criminal violation.
Okay. All right. Well, so let's get into. Earlier, I had mentioned to our viewers that mortgages are a part of the FDCPA.
Yes, mortgages were recently. It was ruled recently that mortgages are now part of the FDCPA. That hasn't been the case for a very long time, up until last year,
Okay.
actually.
So we're going to stop right here just from this. Thank you so much for coming in. But this is going to take us into our next week's show, where we're going to invite Mr. Kodachnikov back so we can talk about how the FDCPA can protect you if you have a mortgage. I know many of my viewers here own homes and have mortgages, so stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back, and I'm your host, PREET GILL. Thank you so much for watching the first segment of Back to Basics, Common Sense Law with PREET GILL. I'm just going to recap exactly what we went through today. So, as a consumer, which is you and I, we have protections built in by the federal government, whether you're here in New York, you're in California, in Hawaii, as long as you're within the United States territories. Just because you own debt does not mean that you have to be ashamed if you fall behind. There are laws that protect you from predatory debt collectors. So just to recap a couple of things that we spoke about with Mr. Kodachnikov, okay? A debt collector cannot call you, or can only, call you between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 p.m., okay? The debt collector cannot lie to you. The debt collector has to be able to stop harassing you if you put it in writing or even if you call them. Now, what we've always said is it's really good to have a paper trail. So if you send a letter, make sure that you have proof that you mailed it to them. So if they make a violation, which they will, because as we discussed, it is actually beneficial and cost effective for them to willfully make these violations, you can actually go to an attorney that practices an FDCPA, and they will be able to, most likely free of charge, represent you because the attorney fees are built in. So finally, take control of your life. Take control of your rights as a consumer. And don't be ashamed to ask for help, especially when you're being harassed, because this law is meant to protect you. Please join me next week as we're going to discuss how FDCPA also includes mortgages. Thank you so much, and I wish everybody a good night.